Welcome back to Absolute Units, the official podcast of the Museum of English Rural Life. I don't know why we say official, because it's not as if there's an unofficial one. You can make it if you want, and we can do some podcast world building. In any case, I'm Joe Vaughan, the museum's social media manager, and my co-host is Dr. Ollie Douglas, our curator. Ollie is currently in Germany for the 2026 Congress of International Agricultural Museums. So it's a solo intro. So for a second consecutive podcast, we're honoured by the company of Old Crockern, the spirit of Dartmoor, a giant who's currently staying in our galleries as part of our new trail, Radical Rural. We continue speaking with storyteller Lisa Schneidau and giant maker / dancer Ruth Webb about Old Crockern's story and his role in the fight for wild camping on Dartmoor in recent years, where Crockern once again emerged to hold a landowner to account. Will more pockets be torn out? Let's find out. Welcome back, Ruth and Lisa. Brilliant to have you back with us.
Oh, lovely to be here.
And Crockern, of course.
And Crockern too.
And Crockern, let's not forget him.
Yeah.
The silent one. Yes. Doesn't really say much, but says a lot as well, somehow.
Mm. So last episode, we talked about the sort of, I guess, the beginnings of the Crockern story and the history of the Crockern tour, as well as the more recent dealings with attempts to enclose Dartmoor and prevent people from wild camping, or just camping, I guess we were talking about more, wasn't it?
It's really wild camping. And yes, I can almost sense loads of people listening to you there and going, enclose? No, not quite enclose, but
right.
That's an interesting word to discuss because there's lots of different ways of enclosing land, isn't there? And
interesting.
The thing that was at threat was the freedom on Dartmoor to wild camp. And that's recently been called backpack camping. So the idea is you just take a tent and the stuff you can carry in your backpack. You camp in a little tent, you leave no trace. It is that kind of transient camping that we're talking about. Rocking up with a camper van, a 6-berth tent, 2 stoves, a barbecue, blah, 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 that's not permitted. On the commons. It's quite important to state that. I think it's probably also quite important to say that there are certain areas in Dartmoor where you can't wild camp. But on the majority of it, we are the only national park that enjoy that privilege. No one else in any other national park in England or anywhere else in England really has got that right to wild camp. They've got the right perhaps to walk on the commons under the Crow Act and all those different things. But yeah, the wild camping thing's pretty exclusive to Dartmoor right now. And that's something Right to Roam campaign would really like to change.
Really interesting.
So anywhere else you go to camp in England, essentially you're paying a fee for a pitch, aren't
Yes.
you? And you're probably you can pay a bit extra for hookup and charge things and do those kind of things. But this is a very different experience.
And this is what Alexander Darwall wanted to change.
Yes. This is what Alexander Darwall effectively wanted to get the legislation reviewed for, so that he could get a ruling that said, actually, this is an anomaly and it shouldn't exist.
And that's where we left the last episode. So, Lisa, do you want to pick up where we left off?
Yes. I want to take you back to January 2023, which was a January where it didn't rain all the time. And there was a day in January 2023, it was quite a warm day. And we had learned that Alexander Darwall had been successful in his attempt in court to stop the premise of wild camping on Dartmoor. And there was a lot of anger about it. There was a lot of anger and a lot of worry and a lot of concern that generated very, very quickly. And the Stars Are For Everyone campaign and the people involved in that, and Right to Roam and everyone involved, did an amazing job in pulling together and messaging of protest really quite quickly. And I'll never forget pulling into the car park at the Park and Ride at Ivy Bridge, which was the designated place where those who couldn't park in Cornwood, the village, which is tiny and there's no parking anywhere, were asked to go to so that you could walk in to Cornwood, quite a long way, but still walkable. And there were just seas of people. There was nowhere to park, even in the Park and Ride. There were queues and queues of people waiting for buses patiently. There were people just coming in from all over. And it turned out that there were about 3,000 people that day who descended on Cornwood, which is a quiet little village. And first of all, gathered down in the centre of the village where there were a few speeches. And then everybody dutifully, calmly, with placards, walked up to Stall Moor, up on the moor, Darwall's land. And it just didn't stop. I got there relatively late because I'd been organising some other stuff, and I had to try and get something to someone else at the front of the procession. And I was fighting through people. Some of the placards were brilliant. There was a huge pair of bolt cutters. There was another big placard that just had a picture of Darwall, and it said, "The peasants are revolting." There were any number of small tents being kind of hoiked up as placards. And the people just went on and on and on, and we all gathered on Stall Moor. Huge gathering of folk. And the music started up. The tune of Adam the Poacher started up. There were all kinds of musicians who would come in. And there was a kind of podium-y thing there, wasn't there, with various speakers. And then the music, well, you don't know because... And all of a sudden, over the horizon came this figure of Crockern. And the music and this swaying giant over the heads of the crowd, and the procession came forward with the musicians, and everyone just started dancing. It was an extraordinary moment. I don't know, it must have been even weirder for you, Ruth.
Well, yeah, I had a behind the scenes sort of view, because I really wanted to say, actually, because I had to get to Cornwood really early, because I had to get to Cornwood so that we could put Crockern together and gather all of the musicians, which would sort of organise folk musicians from all over, make sure that all of the people felt safe in doing something that was quite edgy, which is take your very precious musical instrument up onto the moors where it could rain at any moment and sit there for 2 hours waiting, because we had to get up there so much earlier. So I think I was driving in at about 8 o'clock in the morning, and there were people walking in at that point. And I think it was like maybe 1 or 2 that we had the actual protest. There were people walking from miles, and you could see them with their placards. And we took Crockern up onto the tour with the moor, with all of the musicians, and sat up there playing music for about 2 hours prior to everybody being able to walk up in this procession. And we were just waiting for this moment, like when trying to hear what was being said down at the bottom. And suddenly it was like, go, go, go. And we had to appear there was only really one option. We had to appear over the brow of a hill, the bleakest moorland you've ever seen. Okay, we'll appear over the brow of a hill. We're whooping down towards this huge crowd. We had absolutely no idea how many people there would be there. It was like when we started, when they said, "Do you want to build a giant?" It was like, we've got a couple of hundred. And then within like the week of us building it, it was being ticketed, and it was like, okay, it's gone up to 1,000. Okay, it's gone over 1,000. Like, oh my God, it's just a small giant. How's this going to work? So, but the before and after was incredibly beautiful, because I know this is so cliche, but there was nothing left on that moor. When we left, it was literally only footprints. There was just nothing. We swept the whole entire area. Nobody had left a trace, and it was just the most beautiful showing of like utter love for land, like utter love and care. And that was kind of, in some way, I know some people felt very defensive and angry, and there was all of that. But actually, at the heart of it, and what we talked about in every single meeting was, it can't be in opposition. It can't be, ooh, boo, hiss. You know, there's the bad man and it is all of that. Of course it is. But he's just a conduit. It's just a moment in time. And actually what is really important is your love and your connection to the land. So it was really beautiful seeing behind the scenes. And
it was
witnessing that.
Yeah. I remember there was one placard that just said, "I don't even like camping and I'm pissed off." There were people coming from everywhere. And do you remember that gloriously English moment where we walked past the 2 security guards on Darwall's gate? And it's like, oh, this is awkward.
Yes.
Morning.
But it's a perfect metaphor for that act of wild camping and responsible behaviour in these spaces. You know, leave no trace,
yes.
And to have that many people and a giant and to leave no trace is just
astonishing, isn't it?
Yeah.
We were determined. I mean, we were very, very lucky with the weather. If it had rained, no way could we have gone ahead, because the soil would have got churned up, the whole place would have got compacted, it would have had a real impact. But it was dry. We were blessed with that.
Thank goodness it wasn't this year.
Oh, yes.
But then again, much like today, you know, Crockern arrives and the weather is beautiful.
Yeah.
Yes. How does he do it?
And hopefully now that Crockern's here, lots of people will come to see him. It's a kind of, if you build it, they will come field of dreams idea, I think this. So, yeah.
It was really interesting once Crockern had kind of come out and was there and started popping up in different places. Everyone suddenly knew who Crockern was. It became part of the vocabulary. And kind of meanwhile, so I work as a storyteller and I'm always looking for folk tales and I'm always investigating the kind of modern telling of old stories and the resonance of human experience between an old folk tale and a new folk tale. And while all of this was going on, I was nerding out actually on the story of Old Crockern, because I was doing a master's in applied storytelling, and I wanted to look at environmental story because I'm an environmentalist. And I ended up investigating the story of Old Crockern. I had no idea when I started with that folk tale that it had actually been based on real life. I had no idea that George Fowler was a real person. And suddenly discovering these different things, talking to other storytellers, Mike O'Connor in Cornwall put me in touch with the archive and with the census and different things like this. And the DPA were brilliantly helpful. And just suddenly putting all of these pieces together of what is this character of Dartmoor. It's very interesting as a storyteller when you look at the story arc of the tale of Old Crockern. You've got the determined man at the beginning, sitting on Crockern Tor, looking out, going, this land's rubbish, I can do better, and doing all the work that was needed, gaining agency. Then you've got the bit in the middle, which is this dream sequence, which is this message from somewhere else through a conduit from the land, going, really wouldn't do that if I were you. And then at the end, you've got the, it could be a very moralizing thing, couldn't it? It could just be a little bit too neat. Oh, you've got your pockets ripped out. Told you so. But as a story arc, it's quite a neat arc. And then we've got this developing story on Dartmoor of this rich landowner called Alexander Darwall, who's come to Dartmoor, come to terms, got some land, and has decided he wants to impose his will on the land. And hang on a minute, this is happening all over again. This is the same story. Is it the same story? Is that just me putting 2 and 2 together and making 5? Or is this actually the same story arc? And when Crockern appeared, okay, you've got the dream made real, the dream made manifest. Here is Crockern in person, come to help. Wouldn't it have been interesting if those landowners who were quietly sucking their teeth in the background are going, actually, I really hope Darwall wins. Wouldn't it be really interesting if they had appropriated Crockern? I don't really want to think too much about that. But the dream sequence is here. Crockern is here. But people in the protest and in subsequent gatherings were starting to say, actually, we're all Crockern now. We are actually the message in the dream. We are the ones, 3,000 of us standing on the land going, oi, Darwall, no. You'll get your pockets ripped out if you try that. Don't you dare try that. Same story arc. And so projecting forward when we're in the middle of that and just saying, okay, we've made a lot of noise. We've hopefully made the National Park, the DPA, aware of how much people care about this. And the next thing that happened was that the National Park and the Dartmoor Preservation Association said, right, we're going to appeal. And we needed them to throw their weight behind this. You know, the National Park Authority, the public body, working on behalf of the people to argue with a big landowner, that's a really risky thing for them to do. They're constantly dancing between pleasing the big landowners on the moor and making sure they represent the taxpayer. But a legal case is expensive. It's hugely drawn out. How are we going to raise money? DPA come in, start raising money for it. Then there was an appeal at the High Court in July of that year. And some people protested in London outside the High Court while the hearing was going on. And we didn't take Crockern into London. But the night before that, there was a gathering at Hay Tor, which is one of the photographs that you've got in the exhibition. By that time, Mayday Morris had also formed, a Morris site, which is there specifically to give energy to protest, which Ruth and I are both part of. We have low-vis jackets. We took a leaf out of Libby Bove's book with her Museum of Roadside Magic. The idea was also to have anti-face recognition face paint. That didn't quite work these days, but that's another story. But we all bundled together on Hay Tor, and we wanted to send positive energy in the direction of the High Court. And so there was a lot of music and there was a lot of dancing and a lot of speeches. But there was one point where we were all standing in a circle. I think we were all talking about, you know, our wishes and our intentions, and Crockern was in the middle. And there was just a spontaneous bundle towards Crockern. There was just this, it was like a Crockern scrum. Everybody wanted to hug Crockern.
It was just such a strange feeling because I'd never actually been inside of a giant before, even though I'd made them. And that was my first experience of really inhabiting. And it was like I was in a circle and I was like, I don't know what to do. And then gradually everyone just came towards me. And it was both beautiful and also kind of terrifying because the bundle was really intense. They were really getting into it. And everyone was waiting down on me. And but it was a wonderful moment.
Like, I mean, I guess there's something both really, there's this amazing sense of connection, but also fear in the whole protest. You know, you're coming together in this amazing way, but also it is, you know, you're coming together against a landowner. It's this really interesting mix of emotions that you wouldn't have experienced had you not, you know, had you not danced as the giant and had these people around you, or had you not decided to organise and go up onto the tour.
But also a sense of outrage.
Mm.
I mean, by this point, the story of Crockern was being told by various of us. Story of Crockern was always told because we really did want him to get his pockets ripped out. How dare he? How dare this privileged person who perhaps didn't understand the meaning of being able to get out onto the moor under the stars. How dare they take that right away from someone else? There was a real sense of outrage. And so you just desperately wanted us to win. And of course, when there is a case in court that is considered by judges and you listen to it and you're watching it online and hour by hour, they're picking apart the meaning of the word recreation and it's really dull. And you're just going, how is this going to go? And everyone's saying, we don't know. It's down to definitions now. And we didn't find out until the October.
Yeah, it was October. Yeah. I can't remember. We did take Crockern out once more, I think, in that time. But yeah.
The waiting's really difficult.
It dragged on.
Yeah.
And it was very hard to keep that energy going. To some degree, because we were sort of in this waiting space.
Yes. And then the news comes out. Yeah. Then the news comes out that we had won the appeal. And the DPA and the National Park, I mean, they played an absolute blinder. They did really, really well. And it started to develop into a campaign where everyone had their roles. You know, there were those who had the formal roles in court, and Kevin Bishop from the National Park, I think he really deserves special praise here because he really put in the hours. Kate Ashbrook was there supporting us. There were loads and loads of different people coming in supporting this now. And we won. And that was great until Darwall decided to appeal in the Supreme Court.
Dun, dun, dun.
How much did this cost him? My goodness.
So Darwall appeals. What next?
Well, we found ourselves outside the Supreme Court somewhere around about October 2024, something like that. So a long period of time for all of this stuff. And it was raining, and Mayday Morris were there, and a whole load of folk were there. Rob McFarlane was there, Caroline Lucas was there, all of the Right to Roam lot were there, loads of musicians. And inside, 5 Supreme Court judges were considering this case. And a whole load of us actually went in after the protest, and we had to take our Mayday waistcoats off and our sticks. We had to give them to the security guard because I think they thought we were going to do some protest in the court. But it was really strange going in there. And there on the one side was Kevin Bishop from the National Park and the solicitors and the different advisors. And there was Darwall on the other side with his solicitor and his land agent. And it came down to this. It was extraordinary.
Like seeing Fowler in the flesh.
Something like that. Something like that.
I love the idea that they stopped you going in your Morris dancing outfits. That, Morris dancing is a form of direct action that, there's a risk that you're going to get someone with those bells and sticks and, what might happen.
But it goes back to the kind of dreaming that you mentioned in the original Crockern story. That this protest, there is a kind of dreaminess to it. There's a surrealness to it that is so actually really quite powerful. When people are dreaming and imagining, it's very difficult to grapple with that and to resist it.
Yes. It's a very big thing, but I think by now it was getting really, really tied into the bigger Right to Roam message. Guys standing there with the television cameras going, actually, we want that house over there to extend the right to wild camp across all national parks. And, win or lose, the message was there very strong by now. The campaign had got bigger and bigger.
And this is Guy Shrubsole.
Yes, this is Guy Shrubsole.
Yeah, so Guy Shrubsole's most recent book, The Lie of the Land, he tells some of the story of the Stars Are For Everyone campaign and talks a little bit about, the Darwalls crop up in various places throughout the book, so it's worth reading that. And
we were very lucky. He gave a gallery tour of the Mill last year.
Yeah, and
I think
hopefully we'll lure him back to be on the podcast.
I think there's probably been about 6 or 7 times when his name has come up, and we always say we want to do a podcast with him. But yeah, we would definitely will at some point.
What's really interesting about this, the dream sequence kind of period in the middle feels a little bit like the liminal period in a sort of ritual process. So I don't know whether anyone's familiar with the work of Arnold van Gennep, the anthropologist. This is this sense that there's a rite of passage, and when you have some sort of community process that you go through, a ritual process, there's an extraction from normal social behavior and a sort of reincorporation at the end of the process. So it feels a bit like the story arc. You've got this moment at the beginning, and then a kind of liminal phase in between where no one's quite sure where this is going to go, and everything's a bit up in the air, and old Crockern might or might not be out and about doing old Crockern-y things, and then right at the end there's this sort of reincorporation and things come back together, and the story reaches a conclusion. And it feels quite fitting that this should be a bit like the way in which a calendar custom plays out there in the world. You have this sort of moment of the beginning of a folk procession or a mumming play or something like that, and then at the end there's a conclusion, and in the middle it's all magic, and no one's quite sure what's going to happen. And,
yes.
and it feels great.
I think it's very much like that, but I think within that there are monsters. there are challenges, there are moments of real inspiration as well. And one of the most heartwarming things to me about this whole thing is the camaraderie that has been created with this campaign and the real impetus that it has given to the Right to Roam campaign as a whole. Something that I'm sure Darwall probably didn't intend when he did this, but that has thrown up all kinds of new awarenesses, new challenges, but also a bunch of folk who are really enjoying exploring the moor and talking about the possibilities of the future of different aspects of the moor. A whole bunch of folk who've found a community, actually, as part of this. So that's something that has probably been there in little pockets everywhere, but it has brought it together.
Like a different form of parliament up on Crockern,
I like
gathering
that.
together.
Yeah. I see what you did there. But yes, very much. That's interesting, isn't it? What do we want to extract from the moor?
There's another element to this as well, and we haven't talked enormously about this. We've touched on it in the lichens and the sedges and the reeds, and we've touched on it in talking about the sort of sheep-wrecked landscapes of parts of England. The need for nature to be part of this as well. That nature is there at the table at Crockern, part of those conversations with the people who want to be in those spaces, and that they feel part of nature as well as nature being around them. This point of connection feels significant.
It is. I mean, as part of my study of the story, I discovered that this isn't an environmental story at all, as you might think of it. It's a story about connection with land, and it's a story about ego. Actually, that's what it's about. You could say it's a story of environmental limits. Don't try and grow turnips on the moor. Fair enough. But as I've gradually been telling the story of Crockern more and more, I've reimagined some of those landscapes. So the landscape in 1846 would have been very different. I went up to Crockern Tor quite early on in this work, and I sat on the seat at Crockern Tor. And if you go to Dartmoor, if you go to Two Bridges, if you then take the footpath to Wistman's Wood, which has got its own lockdown story and its own challenges, if you kind of veer off to the right, you will come to Crockern Tor. But sit on the seat and you're looking straight at Prince Hall Farm in exactly the way that Baring Gould probably did. Perhaps Fowler also did. And that landscape would have been a lot boggier, a lot more challenging. It wouldn't have the big beech hedges there that I'm sure Fowler probably had planted, which have now grown up into huge trees, which are some of the only broadleaves in that part of the landscape. The landscape has changed hugely, but getting that into a story, I can talk about curlew, I can talk about heather, I can talk about bog moss and sundew. When you tell a story, you don't want to be too preachy or didactic. You want to show what's there. You want to do that in a way that resonates, but doesn't overdo it. And so when I was telling the story to some of the gatherings that we had, I found myself at the end of the story saying, so is Darwall going to get his pockets ripped out? ? We don't know yet whether he will or not. But then asking the question, daring to ask the question, what would please Crockern? What actions for us on Dartmoor would lead to a happy Crockern? How should we, could we, as a community, all of us, whether we own and manage land or not, how could we manage Dartmoor? That, to me, is almost a far more satisfying ending to the story because it throws it wide open. It's like, back to you, over to you. It doesn't have the kind of smugness of the ending as it, oh, well, he got his pockets ripped out, that'll learn him. Right, I'm going to go and do something else now. Actually, I want to give you something to think about. So, yeah, that's my answer on the nature thing is actually a question.
There's an element for me of the magical also in the fact that the challenge came at that moment, just after COVID, that it came to Devon. And, Devon is, I think, one of the places where a lot of these concepts around our own relationship to the natural world is being very unpicked. It is a bit of an epicenter at the moment, as far as I understand it. And I know it's happening everywhere, but it's particularly strong there. And you've got all of these elements of sort of primitive skills, people being interested in that pre-agricultural ways in which we would have lived with the land. There's huge amounts of learning, huge amounts of bushcraft, huge amounts of forest school. So for it to have come, for this challenge to have arisen in the place in which people are thinking about the folklore, but thinking about the practical elements of how would we have lived on the land, and also going into schools, that I think that it is one of the hotspots of forest school, which obviously isn't the only way of teaching. I'm a forest school leader, so I had to bring it in here. But
we do forest school at Mern as well, actually.
Yay, I love forest school. It's just, it is one of the hotspots of where there is a lot of people going out there into the schools, trying to engage children. There's all of the stuff that happens on Dartmoor in terms of the 10 tours. So there's so much engagement across the community. And for that challenge to have presented itself in that time, in that place where people have got enough grounding that they and support and knowledge that they could actually bond together. There's a magic there.
So could we go back to the Supreme Court and to that extraordinary moment when the judgment comes in?
Well, it took a while for the judgment to come in, I have to say. It didn't come in until May 2025. And we really only got wind of it not very long before at all. But then suddenly there it was. There was an announcement, and you could watch it live online. And the High Court judges, the Supreme Court judges were effectively saying, we're throwing out Dartmoor's appeal. And, we were all watching. We were convinced we were going to lose. We were so scared we were going to lose. We're throwing out Dartmoor's appeal. Actually, we're criticising some of the solicitors who brought it. Case dismissed.
I remember watching it. It was an extraordinary moment.
So I have to say, dear listener, Darwall did get his pockets ripped out, because all of the money that was raised for the High Court case that, was then brought forward to the funding and the time and the energy and everything that went into the Supreme Court case, a lot of that money, minus the costs, has gone into a fund that is now going to help to bring as many people as possible to experience Dartmoor. And the Dartmoor Preservation Association are currently putting schemes together, as I understand it, to look at how that can be best used, working with the National Park. It's quite a nice ending to the tale, isn't it?
Wonderful ending.
And yet, those who work in the visitor centres on Dartmoor will tell you that visitor numbers have really increased, and that there is more and more demand for being able to get out and about. There is a real need for increased support and increased education for outdoor access in our national parks and our wild places. National parks had their funding cut again last year. I know Dartmoor National Park is really struggling with funding, and I think all of the others are too. So even though that funding from Dartmoor has come around and will help, there's still a broader challenge there. And I wanted to highlight it because that challenge, that's present wherever you are in England, not just in Dartmoor. It's that whole thing of, bringing people to this wonderful place. Where do you start? What do you tell first? And there is so much to tell and so much to share in a really positive way. And I think that positive feedback loop can really start. Perhaps this campaign's done a little bit towards that as well.
And what's next for Old Crockern? So after Old Crockern's taken a bit of a holiday in Reading and spent some time here quietly communing with the people of Reading and all of our visitors and telling them this story in his oh so silent way, where to next?
Well, I think, Crockern's a bit like a river. He's just one moment to the next, flowing across land. He had no idea he would come to Reading and tell his tale, and he has no idea how long people will want to listen to him for. And I think, he essentially quite often lives in the dark in a storage shed. And if anybody else would like to tell this story, we would be very, very interested in expanding his repertoire of tales to tell.
But it's also interesting that there's thousands of people who are now also Crockern as well. So I suppose it's not just Crockern has become much more than just the giant has sort of rippled out.
Yes, the physical being is actually sort of in some way immaterial. It isn't where the heart of it lies anymore. And there is something wonderful, isn't there, in that we've spun it from tale into physicality, and now it's gone back out into tale, and everybody has their own tale, And you hear people telling their story about the whole entire campaign and sort of involving themselves in it. And so, I think you're right. There's a kind of mythical element there where we are Crockern.
There's a broader thing as well, isn't there, about the folk arts having a real role to play here, not just in community celebration, but in protest. I've learned so much about that through this, that I think that any folk art will only be successful if it engages loads of people, and if it's fun, if it's inspiring in that way. But it really has brought energy to protest.
It's a really interesting. I've been recently listening to the Ruth lectures, which I highly advise on this topic. But just in terms of, there was two things that I felt were so important that were related to the right to roam. One was really good design can make a campaign sing. It can elevate. It can absolutely elevate. And the design element and the clarity of which the Right to Roam movement have managed to create their leaflets is definitely powerful. And the other one is that saying, which is, something about you only want to join that party if it's a good party. So it's something about that you want to be able to have a celebration and to come together as people and, be able to have a beer as well, and for it to be fun and joyful, that it isn't, the activism doesn't have to just be this angry sort of against kind of situation. So, I
think that the quality and the strength of the design is really, really well represented in the Radical Rural Trail that we have at the moment. Both in terms of what's on display, which features, I think, illustrations by Nick Hayes, some amazing displays by Wildcard organisations like that. But also we've really tried to match that in our own branding. We work with a really wonderful design agency called Studio Noon, who do all of our design work, including the Absolute Units podcast logo and many, many other things. And we've got this sort of onion symbol that we're using to represent the campaign. And I think you mentioned earlier that there's the onion of the world. Was that something you said?
Yes, it immediately reminded me. I think it's C.S. Lewis in the last book of The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, the last battle, where I think Aslan is talking about the whole world being like an onion, except the further in you go, the more layers, the bigger it is, or something like that. I've probably really misquoted that.
I was thinking about it earlier when we were talking about tin as well, and going under the surface in the previous episodes. There's, lots of interesting connections, I think. Yeah. Do you want to go? Anyone?
Do I conclude there?
But I don't know. I think it's
segue from the onion to the end.
I don't know whether it is. I don't know whether this is relevant, but it does. The thing that really tickled me about the whole entire procedure was that there was a piece of paper, right, that said something about recreational usage. Yeah. And then there was all of these people that had to look at this piece of paper and be like, oh, well, what does that particular word mean? And it had to be got out over here and it had to be got out over there, and then everyone had to argue about it. And some people thought that they understood what the piece of paper meant and it looked like it shouldn't have camping, and the other people looked at the piece of paper and thought, oh, no, it should have, say, wild camping. And it went on, this bit of paper went on this like wild journey in and out of hundreds of people's heads and minds and hearts. And then suddenly it got back to being a piece of paper again, where it just said, yes, it's recreational use, and that includes camping. The end. And the bit of paper was just like, well, that's what I said all along. You know, it was like just a wild journey that this little sentence went on in terms of how many people it took, how many hours it took of dissection, and
presumably thousands and thousands of hours. And now it's gone back into storage. Like old Crockern.
Yeah. It's a wonderful thing. It's like, I almost want to feel that piece of paper. You know, it's probably typed on an 80s typewriter or something. I want to see it. And I don't know.
So I think what better way to end these two astonishing episodes. I mean, thank you so much, Lisa and Ruth, because that's been incredible for us, I think. But what better way than to hear the new version of Old Crocken's story?
So there was a rich man from London. His name was Alexander Darwall. And he came to Dartmoor, bought a large area of land, looked about him, and saw some people camping in little tents, ones and twos, just roaming about on his land, enjoying it, looking at the stars. And he said, this is shit. I don't want any of that. I don't want them on my land. I'm going to do something. And so he went to his friends in the High Court. He went to get legal advice, and lo and behold, it wasn't too long before the lawyers had proved his case. There should not be camping on his land by law. Nobody was allowed. Well, he thought that was the end of the story. But one January day, about 3,000 people suddenly turned up on his land. And they all shouted, Darwall, we don't agree with this. We don't think you should ban us from this place because we love this place. And we have a dream that everyone should be able to enjoy it. And in among those people, there came a giant. Old Crockern, the spirit of Dartmoor himself. And he looked straight at Darwall and he said, if you go through with this, I'll rip your pockets out. Do you think Darwall listened?
Hell no.
Well, those people got their friends together. They went back to the court. A different set of judges disagreed with Darwall. Do you think he listened to that? He got even more money together. He went right to the Supreme Court of the land. And he said to all the judges there, I am appealing. I am complaining. I am disagreeing. I want my own way. And those judges, well, they sat and they pondered for a long, long time. And eventually, they decided the verdict. Alexander Darwall, your pockets are well and truly ripped.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
See you next time.
See you next time.
Thanks. That was really
Amazing.
difficult to do without bursting into singing.
Thanks for listening to Absolute Units. I'm Joe Vaughan, and my co-host has been Dr. Ollie Douglas. Absolute Units is made possible through Museums Partnership Reading, our Arts Council England funded partnership with Reading Museum. This podcast is a labour of love, and we love to do it. So it would be amazing if you could please tell your friends about it, help us grow, leave us a review, send a letter, make a giant of your own, plant a tree, anything. We'll be back in 2 weeks' time with another podcast related to Radical Rural, our ongoing gallery trail celebrating protest and the fight for the countryside. This time we'll be speaking to Reading's own Adrian Lawson, a wonderful activist and environmentalist who's played a major role in transformative grassroots projects in our town. He also once dressed as Poseidon and interrupted canopies at the International Maritime Organization. So yeah, it's another great conversation. We'll see you then.